when it's posted online, there will be, when this meeting is posted online, there will be captioning available. So just the virtual participation check-in here. These committee meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to comment at normally at around 6:05. It's going to be a little bit later today because we got started a little bit late. With the exception of the public comment period, and today, the break that's going to start at 7 o'clock, the public is asked to observe and listen. At 7 o'clock, there is an open conversation sort of social space that's going to be available for 15 minutes. So if members of the public who are attending the meeting want to chat with committee members or want to chat with staff, we'll be breaking into a few different breakout rooms, and you can move yourself around and feel free to have some conversation in those spaces. The chat box is open for introductions and for public comment. At all other times, it's a host-only chat, so members of the public can chat to the host if you're having an issue or want to sort of forward a comment or a question. The raised hand we ask to be used only by the committee members, and same with the video. This mostly just helps us kind of keep our screens organized in this virtual space. This meeting is being recorded and it's being streamed also live on YouTube. Just a note for folks who are on YouTube that when we go into the breakout rooms, unfortunately, folks on YouTube will just have to kind of hang out and wait during those times. Only folks who are logged in into the Zoom meeting can participate in the breakouts. So before we do introductions, what we wanted to do today to open the meeting was to we generally have an opening inspiration, and so today what we're going to have a little bit of like an opening activity. And so what we'd like everybody to do, I'm going to put a website into the chat box here. And I just want everybody can click on that website. And what this is a website that you can go to. And we're just asking folks to kind of look up the place where you were raised or the place that you came from recently, or just a place that you're interested in. On that map, you can put in the name of your town, or you can put in a zip code, and it will show you the indigenous peoples from that area. And so we just wanted to share this to sort of acknowledge that we all come from places that are indigenous lands and might not be familiar with the original people from those places, particularly those of us who grew up in North America. So this map is not entirely comprehensive, and just throw that out as a caveat. And also, if you grew up in parts of Europe or East Asia, you won't be able to get information on those places. So what we thought we'd do is just, as part of the introduction, we usually ask people to put their name, if they have an organizational affiliation they want to share, and if they have gender pronouns that they want to share, to put those into the chat. And we also just invite you to share what you learn from this map, and what you learn about the indigenous people, or learn at least the names initially of the indigenous people from the area that you're from. So members of the public, we'd like to kind of learn about where you're from too. And I'm just going to give everybody maybe a minute to do that, and then we'll start introductions.
And I would just say, use the link, use the second link that was chatted in the chat box. It'll be a little bit easier to navigate to the address.
Apologies, I had the wrong copy and paste going on there. Okay, well, as we get going with introductions, I do see now that the live transcription is available. So just wanted to kind of direct folks that if they want to access that, go to the Zoom menu bar and scroll over to where there's those 3 dots and it says more. And if you click on those dots, you'll get a drop-down menu and you should be able to access that live transcription. So I'm going to start with committee member introductions and then move on to staff. And we'll end with Sam, who will help introduce the members of the public. So let's start with Jeffrey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jeffrey Moreland, he, him, committee member.
Michael.
Michael Eden Hill, he, him, committee member.
Faith. Oh, Faith, you're muted still.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Ah, excellent. New headset tonight. Sorry for everyone's introduction to it. Faith Graham, a committee member, and I grew up in the territory of the Salish, Coast Salish and Nisqually tribes.
Thanks, Faith. Robin.
Good evening, Robin Wang, committee member, he, him, and I grew up in the Massapequa territory on Long Island.
Thanks, Robin. Robin, your volume is a little bit quiet. We were able to hear you, but just next time you talk. Megan?
Hey, everybody. Megan, she, her, and committee member. And I grew up in the land of the folks of Menominee and Potawatomi, also now known as Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the other Milwaukee.
Amanda?
Good evening, everyone. Amanda Squimpanyazi, she, her, committee member, and I currently reside on the homelands of the Chinook and Cowlitz people.
Shanice?
Good evening, everyone. Shanice Clark, she, her, committee member, and I grew up on the lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket lands in the Massachusetts area.
Thanks, Shanice. And Maria.
Hi, everyone. Maria Sippin, she or they pronouns, committee member, and I grew up on the territory and land of the Tonga people in Los Angeles.
Thanks, Maria. And we have one committee member absent right now, and that Ramses, and so we'll keep an eye out and do his introduction if we see him log on. So we're going to start with staff who are going to be actively participating in the meeting today. And I'll start with James, who is going to be our tech lead. James, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. James Valdez, he, him pronouns, and I am a member of the PCEF staff and will be here to take care of any technical needs. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or via chat. And I grew up in the land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people.
And June?
Hi, everyone. PCEF staff. I use she, her pronouns. Grew up on the lands of the Acadiana Nation, Keith Nation, and the Tonga Nation in Southern California.
Thanks, June. Wendy?
Hey there, Wendy Kelfkin, she, her, PCEF staff, and I grew up outside of Tucson, Arizona on the land of the Tohono O'odham people.
All right, and I will introduce myself and then pass it to Sam. My name's Katie Lister. I use she, her pronouns. I'm PCEF staff, and I grew up in the land of the Koyukon, Athabaskan, and Gwich'in people in interior Alaska. Sam?
Good evening, folks. Sam Barrasso with the PCEF staff. I use he and him pronouns. And I grew up on the lands of the Cherokee and the Muskogee in in the suburbs of Atlanta. Thank you for doing this. So I'm gonna go ahead and read a handful of. I'm gonna read through folks that are here, and I'm gonna try to read through a handful of the territories and areas that folks grew up on, tribes represented or tribes from there. We've got Ryan Nielsen with us, he, him from the Laborers Union, who grew up on the Kickapoo land. We've got June here, who just introduced herself. We've got Greg Haar here, he, him from Solar for All, born and raised in the Cowlitz territory. We've got PCEF staff Janet Hammer here, who grew up on the Tongva in southern Tongva lands in Southern California, and spent some time elsewhere on other tribal lands. We've got Deidre Schutz with her from Nutrition Garden RX, who grew up in the Chippewa and the Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde, as well as the Kayupuya lands. Got Jenny Hall here from Energy Trust of Oregon, who was born on the, and I apologize, I'm not going to quite get these, the Nusiok and the Lumbee tribal lands in North Carolina. We've got Michael Edenhill, just stating this here, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute land. We've got Lockie PCEF staff who grew up on tribal lands of the Keats Nation as well as the Tongva Nation. We've got Angela Providelli here, PCEF staff who grew up on the land of the Seminole and the Guarana. And many apologies for potentially butchering some of these pronunciations. So thank you all for being here with us tonight.
Thanks, Sam. So I also, and I failed to mention this when I was sort of talking about introductions, but if there are any members of the public who would like to sign up for public comment, please just go ahead and indicate that now in the chat box so that we can call on you and get to that. So I think I'm going to switch the order just a tiny bit to give folks a minute to put their name in the chat box if they want to do public comment, and ask committee members if they have had a chance to review the minutes from the May 5th meeting, and if there are any edits, corrections that need to be made to those. All right, hearing none, we're going to call those minutes approved. And I don't see anyone signed up for public comment. So I don't see it. Sorry, I just got distracted by the chat box. I don't see anyone signed up for public comment, so I think that we can move on to the next item of the agenda, which is going to be June, who is going to give give you all an update on public engagement. So June, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides, and I will do that.
Sure. I just wanted to pause for a second. Ryan, did you want to give public comment, or was that sort of a note for staff? Wanted to check.
Yeah, I mean, just a question. I mean, I don't really know where it falls. I mean, I just wanted to know if we're kind of getting a group of partners together. We want to apply for the next round, and it would be good if we could have someone kind of just give a short overview, because I've been here, but others haven't. So I don't know where it's appropriate to say this, so I'm just going to throw it out there now. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, Ryan, we'll follow up with you. Ryan, if I want to double check, but if we don't, can you just direct message one of our hosts your email address so we can follow up with you?
Sure thing. Thank you, Sam.
And I think I have one last kind of question, Sam and Katie. I know we're running a little bit behind. So I was just wanting to do a quick time check of like when we should aim to kind of wrap up here so I don't get too long-winded.
I think that we will take the time that we need. We had originally planned to transition at 6:45, and so I think if we can try and hit 6:50, that would be great. We can split the difference.
Okay, cool. All right. I'm guessing you all can hear me okay. We can stay at this slide. So I have a 30-minute presentation prepared for you all, so hold on to your seats. It's going to be a good 30 minutes, I'm hoping. And so just in case you don't know who I am, my name is June, use she, her pronouns, and I spend a lot of my time focusing on community engagement. So the purpose of this update is to give you all an overview of really what is kind of going on in the next 6 months And I think just kind of trying to like really think about this ramp up to the second RFP. All right, so next slide, please. So last time I did an update and talked with you all about making committee meetings more inclusive. And so the slide kind of shows a visual of like digital sticky notes that we use in an exercise to think about ways to be more inclusive. And so last November, the themes that kind of came up was creating community space in the meeting, increasing accessibility and visibility, and being more connected to community members. So I just wanted to mention that just to say that I'm still holding this feedback. And I also kind of want to acknowledge there's a sort of difference and tension between making the grant committee meetings more accessible and kind of the purpose of having a space for community participation. So what I mean when I say that is if I were going to design a meeting for you all as a committee to make a decision and decide on the rules of a PCEF program, it's going to look different than a meeting that I might design to kind of center priority communities and their input and kind of meeting them where they're at. So I just to hold that kind of tension of like, it's going to be hard to kind of structure that perfect space, and that we're just going to need to create space not only in this meeting, but in areas outside of this meeting and kind of focus some of that energy on that, where we can kind of structure a meeting or an event that centers the priority communities that we want to get input from or participate. So next slide, please. We're going to start with you all talking a little bit in brainstorming. So I wanted to take a deep breath and transport ourselves into September, where we have put out the second RFP. Like, can you believe it? That's great. So you transformed into that time. And so you are feeling proud of how community was engaged leading up to this. And I want to note in this exercise, right, we can't control the outcomes. We have no idea if people love it or hate it. We just feel proud about the process. That's something that we can kind of control in this. So I want you to just think of two influential things that happened to get us there, to a place where you're feeling proud and good about how community engaged with this process, just thinking of the context that we have right now. And when I say context, right, it's still in a pandemic. We're still in a pandemic. I'm just going to stop there. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to kind of think through that before I ask Katie to help me call on committee members to kind of share one of those things that happened that made you proud of the community engagement process for the second RFP. So I'm going to turn off my video, and then I'll turn it back on in 60 seconds because I don't have that cool clock thing, and ask Katie to call on y'all. All right, let's Katie and committee members. I see some of y'all looking down though, so maybe you're not ready. Someone want to volunteer? I'm gonna write this down while you talk.
That was a quick 60 seconds, June, but I feel some ideas coming.
Okay.
Amanda?
Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think infinity spaces would definitely be something that would be influential to getting us to the second RFP, simply because I think this kind of process impacts communities of color different than it does our white counterparts. So that's something that I think would be influential.
Thanks, Amanda. I think I'll stare at the screens until I get one more share.
Robin?
Do I share one or two?
Share two.
All right. I think first thing is more exhaustive means for engagement, resulting in many new smaller organizations applying for the first time. And then second is tons of facilitated collaboration sessions that help or facilitate groups for applying jointly in a collaborative way. Or submitting collaborative applications, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks, Robin.
I'm holding out for one last one. I know I said one more, but I'm like, oh no. All right.
Faith? Nope.
Okay, it's a two-step process.
Yep.
I'm learning. Okay, I wanted to plus what Amanda said. I love the idea of holding affinity spaces, and many affinity spaces, not a single BIPOC affinity space. So I love that. And I just kind of riffing off of what Robin shared too, I would love to see that we have information sessions that are not just information sharing out, but are really collaborative design sessions. And that those aren't necessarily delivered by staff or by committee members, and instead are really community leaders and who know about and understand that this is their grant fund and want to participate and are helped to participate and lead those kind of design sessions. That seems like it would be super success and something to be proud of.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is great. I feel like we're in the similar headspace. I definitely think about this piece around small groups, and I forget who, I think Adrienne Marie Brown said like small groups is a unit of change. And so like, I think the themes that you have coming out here really resonate with me. Thank you. Okay, so next slide. I realize these slides, I make them look more mathy than it really is, but it's a way for me to kind of just talk through the approach that I'm taking with community engagement. So, right, it's not a surprise that we're going at a rapid pace, and so we need to be judicious and strategic with our time. And so when I think back to our guiding principle, community powered, we know what this graphic for me shows how I'm thinking about the dimensions of community power. So the guiding principle says that we should trust community experience, we should support capacity building, and we should also foster community power. So the first dimension on the x-axis that I have here is the scope of influence. So what can a community actually do to influence a process? And then the second one, the y, is the capacity to implement. So is there actually capacity to implement the outcomes of a process? Like, why go through something if, you know, at the end of it, we can't take that and move forward with it? So for example, right now, I probably wouldn't suggest that we go out with the guiding principles for public comment again. It doesn't feel like the right space or time for folks to like be influential, and I don't know that we have a lot of staff time in a way too to kind of carry out that process as well. So that's kind of where what I'm thinking. And so the suite of activities that I'm going to share with you today about what we're going to be doing to, you know, get community like ready for the RFP focuses on the top right quadrant, which is areas where community can actually influence the process and we can implement those changes or the things that folks are telling us. And so I want to go to the next slide. So I think some of you were in a group before that kind of presented this big community engagement plan, and we're kind of shifting. I think for some of you there, Renfis isn't here, but something Renfis said that I thought about a lot was like, okay, this seems like the Cadillac version. Like, what is the vehicle that will actually just get us what we need to get there? And, you know, being in sort of this kind of like mode of like building, I don't know, building the bike as we go somewhere, get groceries or whatever. Like what is like the minimum we need to do to get somewhere? And so what I'm going to present to you, I want to present you the Cadillac, but given what we have today in our current context, I gave you a Prius. We got power windows. We're getting there more efficient. We're getting there efficiently. You know, it's alignment with our values, and eventually we can kind of grow to get to something, to the aspiration that we want to get to. So I hear you where we want to go. I don't want to lose sight of that. I think we do need to keep dreaming and pushing. But I just want to tell you that the suite of things that I will present kind of live in that sort of focus activities here. And they speak to the application process, the RFP scoring criteria, and capacity building. So the main areas, I think, within the entire program of PCEF, we can really just like have a bunch of influence. Great, okay, now we're done with that little graph thing. Can we go to the next slide? But we still got more community engagement math. So I just also wanted to kind of touch on the approach for community engagement. Keeping our eye on the larger goal here, what we're trying to do at the end of the day, when we have everything implemented, is get quality climate and community benefits to PCEF priority communities. We want to get these benefits to our priority communities. And so the equation, very scientific, just kidding, that we're trying to get there with, and the way that I'm trying to think about these pieces of work and organize them is, one, inclusive participation of communities, and quality decision-making by committee and staff. So what are ways that can help us make good decisions? And then quality grant proposals. If we have quality grant proposals that speak to community needs, we're going to get those quality climate and community benefits to our PCEF priority communities. So I have activities that kind of fall within each of these buckets. So I'm going to start with inclusive participation. So Katie, can you go to the next slide? So the main activities here, so there's one in like highlighted in orange, and the ones in orange are the ones I'm going to talk more deeply about. So we could just kind of save that. So ways, the main activities we'll be doing to include people in our priority communities in the PCEF process is, one, small group briefings and info sessions. We're going to try to go smaller, down to the 8 to 12 kind of range, so that we can really talk with people, walk folks through things. We're also going to be doing more effective communication. And so that's kind of a legal standard by the American Disabilities Act that kind of prioritizes proactive access to information. We'll be taking a lot of tips from the Emergency Coordination Center in the ways that they're integrating accessibility practices to get vital information out to people. I think mini grants are key in this. Language access work that Lockie, our communications manager, is doing. Capacity building trainings that James will be leading the strategy for, and one-on-ones with our priority community orgs to try to get them interested in this. And I think the big one is like, it's a little bit of an outcome and a thing, is like increasing the priority community applicants, right, in our pool. So we just, I think going back to what Robin had said, like seeing more, or I think Robin used that, to increasing the number of applicants that are new, that are reflecting our priority populations in this next cycle. All right, for more community engagement maps, we will go to quality decision making. Next slide. So to make really good decisions about the rules of the RFP, we have the evaluation work that Janet is leading, also with a reporting subcommittee. And then we also have, we're going to have a public comment process for the scoring criteria. All right, the next part of the community engagement map, quality grant proposals. Thank you, Katie. And so how are we trying to impact getting quality grant proposals? One, we're going to be having community design sessions, which I'll describe more in detail later. I think part of getting quality grant proposals, this kind of goes in between quality decision making as well, is resolution on the timeline and the RFP rules. The sooner we can let folks know what our timeline is, the rules of the RFP, the more outreach that we can do. So this timeline, I think, is such an influential piece, because right timing is very critical at any community engagement. And the last piece is an outreach cohort. I think we've talked about that a little bit before, but I'm going to dive more into that. We are doing well on time. This is great. Thank you for still being here on this ride with this Prius. All right, next slide. This is all of it. So if you wanted to see all of it, this is it. I talked through all of the priority engagement opportunities and activities that we'll be doing. And I'm just going to focus on these three in the orange circle here: increasing priority community, the applicant pool, those efforts that we're taking on, community design sessions, and the outreach cohort. And then after that, I think we'll probably have like 5 minutes for questions. So write them down because I want to answer them. Next slide.
And June, before you jump in, I just wanted to note that Ranfis joined us. Our committee member, Ranfis Pietro, joined near the beginning of this presentation. And I think we can safely assume that we will go up until the break with this community engagement conversation.
Cool. Hi, Ranfis. You missed the Cadillac thing. We're going with a Prius, not a Cadillac. Okay, you got it.
My apologies, Avery, for joining late. And thanks, June, the shout out.
No worries. Okay, so can we skip this slide, Katie? I want to go to this one last. Okay, so I wanted to start with the community design sessions that are being held right now. So what they are community-centered capacity building workshops, and that take participants through creative activities. So then they're thinking about and getting ready to apply for PCEF funding. So that kind of sounds a little ambiguous, but the idea, so basically, we've had the first workshop last week, and the people that are in the workshop are folks who have, most of them were folks who didn't apply before and aren't like traditional, like in the climate organization type of work. And so these exercises kind of go through, okay, like who's your stakeholder, how are they impacted by climate, et cetera. So it kind of just goes through a creative process for thinking about the people that they're serving and what else they need to do to listen to them. And the idea is that it connects what they do to PCEF. And so we're going to be holding 2 workshops for the public that cover creative processes to get folks ready for the RFP. And then we're actually having that same content delivered in a 4 workshop series with 2 small cohorts. And these cohorts represent folks in our priority communities and folks who maybe not traditionally think of themselves as climate organizations. One cohort, they have their first meeting that starts on Saturday. We opened up Saturdays just for folks who may be fiscally sponsored or just, they don't do this for their day job. And then we have another one that's on Thursdays from 3 to 5 p.m. And so I think we have about 20 something people enrolled for both of those. And I think it kind of gets hopefully some collaborations, but at least a peer network or cohort for folks to talk things through and take the time to understand PCEF more. Some of the folks we targeted for the sessions are folks we didn't see. And so I say folks, I mean, you know, nonprofits or community groups that we didn't see put in applications in the first RFP. And so we're in Zoom land for May and June to do this. And it's kind of a, I don't know, it feels like a good kind of like priming for people to get invested into PCEF and being part of our process, or maybe even think PCEF isn't for them right now. So it's just a deeper dive to build community as well. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the second thing is the outreach cohort. I think we've brought it up a couple of times in the past year. And so what the outreach cohort is, what it's meant to do is basically work with 6 people who are community connectors. They don't have to represent all of PCEF priority populations, but just some of them that like, so when I say that, I mean like if we're missing, say like, I don't know, we feel like there's like 6 different identities that are being missed, we're not gonna just go for 6 different identities, we're gonna go for like a cohort of people who are ready to do this work. And so we're gonna try to contract with 6 community connectors, and the idea there is that they bridge PCEF benefits to their community. So who we're targeting for this opportunity are individuals who are members that organize their communities and they're underrepresented in our outreach. So that includes the Native community, Black community, immigrants, creative or cultural workers who have an intersectional identity, and people with disabilities. And so over 12 months, we're gonna ask each member to spend about 150 hours with us with a total of $15,000 at the end of the year. And so this first, in one phase of that, they'll be learning about the PCEF program. The second, they'll serve as grant application reviewers for this next RFP. And then the third is that they'll be running their own outreach with PCEF staff support. And what that means is, you know, maybe I feel like people, like I want to throw like a community, I don't know, gathering dinner or something to let folks know about maybe we should be doing a community garden project. Let's get them excited about PCEF that way. If that's something that the outreach cohort member feels is best for their community, let's go with it. So these are, it's not us trying to be prescriptive with the outreach that they want to do to bridge PCEF. So we're asking them to take the lead and sort of be these like ambassadors to PCEF. So we're going to start selection in August, and hopefully they will start in October. That's the plan. The paperwork is in. I'm feeling good about it. Okay, so last thing, 2 slides before this. I think like immediately what we want to do is like really increase PCEF priority communities. It's like the number of applications that they have in this next RFP, and you know, them submitting quality grant proposals. So there's just a lot of one-on-one outreach with folks, presentations to key stakeholder groups, invitations to the PCEF Climate Action Design Sprint, which is the community design sessions. And so we're using just, you know, those tools of trying to build relationships to the gaps that were identified in our applicant pool, which were workforce applications focused on people with disabilities, workforce applications focused on women, projects training up and coming contractors in deep energy retrofits in the clean energy sector, and you know, always wanting to prioritize reaching out to communities of color with a focus on Black and Indigenous organizations. All right, I think that was like 25 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. I'm ready for your questions. I'm ready for your, I don't have discussion questions. I felt like this is more of just like an update. This is what's going on. So I welcome any questions that you have. Robin?
This is fantastic. Thanks, June. I don't really have questions. I just have kind of feedback, suggestions, and is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Feedback and suggestions are welcome.
I have quite a few, so I'll just keep this in mind. One, love the community connectors. I would love to entertain the concept of one or two of us committee members pairing up with a community connector. Doesn't mean that we're going to every single meeting, but I'd love to be able to have that opportunity to pair with them and kind of share part of that ride, so to say. I think we should consider perhaps giving points from a scoring perspective for organizations that participate in a community design session as an incentive to get people to meet together and talk. Another thing is some of the elements that you're talking about kind of come from or similar to the concept of unconferences. And this is kind of what piggybacking of what Faith mentioned, is having kind of participant-led conversations as opposed to staff or organization-led discussion groups. And then the last comment is, I think by the time we ended the review process, I think each of us in our heads, each of the committee members in our heads, we had a pretty good idea of what would be a successful application. We've read through each of us 15, 20 applications. We have a pretty good idea. And I think it would be really cool if we can somehow distill that feedback that's in our head and share that with the community so that they know kind of what's a good application, right? What makes for a strong application. So if there's somehow we can kind of loop that information back to the community, I think we're going to, in general, see a much higher caliber of applications. So those are my quick comments. Happy to dive deeper at any time.
Thanks, Robin.
Any other thoughts, comments, or questions?
Yeah, I'll just kind of wanted to reiterate that I think this is really excellent and appreciate the cohort approach. The context of doing this work in a pandemic-ish environment adds another layer, and I think it's evident that there's intention on strategies to build capacity for different kinds of applicants that not consider themselves applicants as well. I appreciate, just wanted to affirm that I have no clarifying questions or anything.
Thanks, Shanice.
Faith?
Yeah, thanks. Again, same great content, great presentation, and really appreciate where you're headed and what you're doing and the presentation. So thanks so much for that. The comment I would make is something I know you're already aware of, but it's something I have to remind myself of all the time, which is how are these three strategies that you particularly pointed us to and explained tonight related to one another, and do each of them know how they're related to each other? So just making sure that you're really taking advantage of the three strategies working in concert with one another. So does the cohort know that a goal is to increase the applications of these particular populations? And does the cohort know how to participate also in those workshops, right? And drive people to those workshops and to those design sprints. So I know that's what you're already working on, but I could see where one could actually put them in a silo and forget how connected they all are. So thanks.
Thanks, Faith. I appreciate the comment on weaving things together.
Michael, and then Megan.
Thank you, Janet, for everything you've done here. It's actually made a lot of sense. I was thinking back a few slides. I only have one small concern, and that is using the city's model for outreach to communities. Looking at their latest COVID response, it was pretty much shit. So I'm wondering if that's the model that we really want to follow, especially for reaching out to PCEF priority populations. I don't know. Maybe they did better than the numbers would suggest. But I'm going to throw that out there that it seems like the city, the county, the state's models all sort of failed for outreach. And I'm wondering if that's the model that we do want to follow for reaching out.
I think to that real quick, I think, Michael, I appreciate that, like what's surfacing is, for me, from that comment is making sure we're also critical with what we can learn from, you know, getting the outreach out from the pandemic. And for example, talking to the Emergency Coordination Center. And so some of those conversations are teed up. But, you know, I do appreciate the reminder of being critical and like understanding the learnings that we can take from things and kind of questioning, like, is this the route we're going to go? Does this meet our needs or the end that we're trying to get to?
Megan?
Yeah, my reaction, I had actually a similar line of thought to Michael there, but I'll back up first and just echo the kind of appreciation for the clear presentation and the thoughtfulness that clearly has gone into all this. What I really am liking about it is the depth of relationships you're imagining. Like, that's something that I don't personally see and hear community members talking about the city succeeding in doing in lots of other places. So I really do think it's something where we can be different. It's having like quality, in-depth, ongoing, sustained, mutually respectful and beneficial relationships. So I really like that. And the slide I was most drawn to is the one on the community, I forgot what they were, outreach. Can you go to that slide, Katie?
Yeah, outreach cohort.
I think this model is really cool. It reminds me a little bit of the Portland Climate Action Equity group, but done much more robustly here with actual more resources and presumably a lot more support for that. And so I'm excited about it. It seems to draw from like community health promotores and that world too. So I think that's really exciting to me. I'm wondering if 6 is enough, like, because if somebody drops out or gets sick or something happens to one of those 6, it just doesn't seem like there's enough resilience in that number, maybe, to, if you just have kind of one person for each of these communities. So that's just kind of one reaction I had was, if like why 6, it's a lot of time, but it's paid time, so it's great. I'm excited about it. Yeah, I guess that's just like, this is one I want to dig into more and hear more about it if we had time, about all your kind of deep thoughts about it. But I'm excited about this in particular because it seems to really draw from good practices in other fields. And I think it could, really connect to the other things that Faith was pointing out, the connections among all of these goals. And I will say that I think it's so much outreach. And I also just have this question of like, the community going to feel over outreached to on every single aspect of PCEF all the time? And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. I just wonder sometimes. And if it gets a little confusing, like we're asking all this outreach all the time, it's great. And I'm sure you're sensitive to that concern of kind of overburdened outreach. But what I like about the outreach cohort is it's a different model than just kind of asking for feedback all the time. It's more like in-depth relationships. So I guess I had sorry. And then my question was more about Michael's line of thinking. I guess there seems like there's probably a lot learned from the COVID response communications. You mentioned some positive learnings on accessibility, and Michael brought up perhaps a lot of learnings of failure too. And so if we had time, I would love to kind of keep going with that conversation. But I don't think we have time for it tonight, so I'm not expecting a full answer, but I was a little curious about some of the accessibility lessons learned that you thought were really good.
I wrote this down, Megan, and I'll follow up. And I think, Katie is watching time, so I'm gonna let you do what you want to do.
Yeah, we do. I just want to do a quick time check that it is 6:56, and we have in the queue, I see Rand Peace's hand Michael's hand looks like it went down, but Maria's hand is up. So maybe we can take just a couple more minutes and we'll just bump things and start the break at 7 o'clock and then kind of come back 5 minutes late. So Ramses?
Yeah, I guess I'll just be quick, given time constraints. Just echo, I think, what's been said here thus far. Really appreciative of just trying to continue to move the ball forward on our shared value on community powered. So just want to share that deep appreciation. And then just want to comment that Robin made about, encouraging committee members to just, join some of the folks in the cohort to join as we learn about this. So I just want to just uplift that because I think that's a great idea, and where that's possible, I think that's great. And so in the spirit of just moving community powered, just want to just echo support on what's being presented. I might have some follow-up questions on some terms, but yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Ramses. Maria?
Thank you, June. I think there's so much to be excited about with what you shared with us here. The community design sessions remind me of hackathons. Is that something that you were going for? And is any part of this intended to pair different new partners and for folks to like find other people who might elevate the kind of work they want to do with PCEF and help create that teaming formation perhaps? Or is this really solely for like individual applicants to increase their readiness, but not necessarily like a matchmaking type of activity?
Yeah, it's really sort of the second one. There isn't a lot of collaboration more than there is specifically for the smaller cohorts, like in the design sessions, right? There are like the general public ones and then these two small cohorts who go through that same information. So the two small cohorts, the intention there is to like build community and have folks you can talk to as you're going through the process yourself that can motivate and encourage you. And so it's kind of this more open space.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Thank you, June, so much for that. I know that this is a topic that the committee would love to and could certainly spend a lot more time talking about. We are going to be moving now into just a 5-minute like actual break, and then we'll come back for 15 minutes into breakout rooms. James will be moving committee members into breakout rooms, but members of the public, when that happens, you should see a little square when the breakout rooms are available. If you're a member of the public and you're logged into Zoom, you should see a little square with squares inside of it appear on your Zoom screen, and you can use that to move yourself around to the different breakout rooms and just have some sort of social time to have conversations with committee members or staff, and maybe there will be, some more ideas about community engagement. This is a way to engage the community that is here right now. So it's 7 p.m. at 7:05. We'll come back and those breakouts will start. And then at 7:20, we will come back to the full group.
Okay. Enjoy your breaks.
Okay, so we're coming back from our break and moving into our breakout. And I'm not sure if it looks like all of the members of the public may still be in this main room. This might be a change in Zoom. But it appears that there's a box that has popped up, and that if you scroll down it, you can choose which room to join.
Katie, I can hear you. Not sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Looks like.
So, James, so it looks like we might have a little text saying, James, is there anything?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on how to get people into let the public go into the breakout rooms?
I could just assign people if that's an option. It shows that everybody has not joined, but I thought that you should be able to click on the breakout rooms at the bottom.
There's
and have
no
the option
option
of choosing one.
Yeah.
I think we would have to be assigned co-host to be able to do that, and probably a bunch of us aren't. Although Sam and Katie should be.
No, well, let me.
I have the option to do it.
I can do it too.
Let me just randomly assign folks then.
Yeah.
To rooms. That might be the best and easiest way to do that. Except for I won't assign you, Katie, or the captioner. That's okay.
Okay, that sounds good.
And apologies to the folks on YouTube who cannot go into breakout rooms. But hopefully people have been able to migrate into them.
It looks like it, yeah. Okay, it looks like, does it look like everybody? No, it does not look like everybody is back in the main room.
It looks like room 3 is still closing. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here they come. Okay, well, welcome back to the main room. Thank you all. We are going to jump right into the next part of the agenda, which is returning to a conversation about the mini grant program that we started at last week's meeting. Well, there will be a little bit of a review, just real quick for members of the public who may have missed that. But if you want more detail about that, you can look online at the meeting material from May 5th and also at the meeting minutes that are part of today's meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela Previdelli, who is going to walk through the mini grant presentation. Angela.
All right, thank you. Well, I think you can go to the next slide. But so as we start, I'm hoping folks had a chance to read through the memo. And I just want to acknowledge, I know last time it was a ton of information. It had been a long time since you had heard anything about mini grants, so it was a lot all at once. Loved all of the questions and interests, tried to get as much of that down on paper for everyone. It turned into a little bit of a long piece of writing, but hopefully everyone got to review some of that to get some of the nuts and bolts of what's going on. So for today, it's really to continue that conversation, create space to kind of, you know, if there are still lingering questions, or if you want to follow up, or if you have feedback and you've had a chance to sit on things, this is a good chance for that. So can hop over to the next slide. Okay, so some of the questions from last time, we just wanted to have this up so that you know sort of the conversation that y'all had in April of last year that carried over into what the proposal looked like that I brought last time. And so here you can see the conversation, the takeaways from the April 2020 meeting are there, which helps explain some of the elements that went into the proposal. And then at the bottom there, you see the actual council authorization. So that's what we took to council on April 1st, along with the first RFP's recommendations. And so it's that 400,000 amount, and with $100,000 quarterly disbursements. And then you see there the $5,000 max amount per grant. There's some specific reasons for all of those numbers that we talked about. That's mentioned in the memo. $5,000. It's written into city code. That's what we can do without having to go back to council. So that allows us to be responsive. The $400,000, that's really a test. We're going to see what the right amount is, and the way for us to see that is going to be by doing it for a year, and seeing if the demand is greater or if it's less, so that we can really right size and try to hit the right amount for what's needed and what staff capacity can meet. Also, there's only 3 slides today, and I already did the big information dump. So, you know, I want to make sure that there's as much space maximized for y'all to be able to continue the conversation. So feel free to do that, but we can jump to the next slide in the meantime. All right, so coming out of the conversation from the last meeting 2 weeks ago, originally we had said that inside of the prioritization process, that it was just going to be small organizations that were going to be prioritized. We went ahead, we heard loud and clear to add the PCEF priority populations as part of that prioritization. So that is now a modification an amendment, we could say, that has been baked into how we're thinking about it moving forward. And then I can say a little bit more about what that looks like in the application. There's the actual like draft questions is included in the memo, if you're wondering what that looks like, and how we're able to do that in a way that's a little bit higher level so that it's not as big of a lift as it is in the full RFP, but still gets at some of the pieces around prioritizing folks that reflect, organizations that reflect and are led by PCEF priority populations. And then also the second piece is moving up the schedule for program evaluation. So Faith, that was a piece that you brought up there. Our suggestion is doing it after Q3. So that would allow 3 rounds of mini grants to really go so that we can start to see what's happening. There's a lot of outreach that has to happen. There's a lot of getting the word out for folks to have the chance. And we're expecting that after 3 rounds, we'll start to have an idea of trends and what's happening to be able to, in that 4th quarter, actually start to, we're going to be doing the evaluation. We're going to start coming together with proposals for how to tweak the process so that when we go out for the following year, we have, y'all have a lot of feedback to chew on and evaluation to chew on. In terms of what you will be chewing on, I think that's the next slide. Okay. We want to make sure it was clear the kind of information that we'll be able to bring back to you for you to understand how the program is performing. There's going to be 1-year grant agreement periods. So in terms of actually understanding how folks are using the money, that's a little bit further out because for each quarter, it's going to be a year out before we get those final reports. But what we will be able to tell you is what they're proposing, what they're asking for, who, how much, when. So you can see here, these are the pieces. So the support for organizations that serve and reflect priority populations, what percentage is going to small organizations, also just the demand, I'll be able to tell you if we have extra money, the demand is much greater than what we allotted. And some of those other pieces there. So I think is that the last slide that we have for today? Oh, except for the seeing what's going to happen next. Michael, I'm looking at you because I know you just said that you have this like slight clairvoyance to know where things are going to go. So let's see. But really, this is just a time for folks to continue the conversation. There was lots that we weren't able to fully jump into last time. So who wants to jump in? Faith. Oh, sorry. Katie, do you want to be calling?
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go. I was muted, but Faith, and I also just wanted to sort of note if there's any clarifying questions from the memo or anything like that too, just to now is the time.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have any clarifying questions. I thought the memo was really robust and I really appreciated it. It was clear. And I really appreciate also that it feels like you took into account really everything that at least that I remember was shared at the last meeting. So thank you so much for that. I think I have one ask for additional piece of information that would be really useful to hear. And that for me is like how much time does it take as a staff person to administer the full mini grant program and also more specifically to evaluate applications that come in? And the reason I ask that is because I can imagine that piece, that narrow piece of actually reviewing applications that come in to put them into the categories and to do the priority from might be something that we can either have the committee do or a committee member do or another member of the public, perhaps somebody that's part of our cohorts that we were just talking about, our community engagement cohort. So I think in order to say whether or not that's a reasonable ask, we need to know what kind of time commitment that would be. So that's another request I would have for information, is to track that. And I really appreciate the reprioritization of including priority populations. So thanks for that.
Great. Thank you, Faith, and great job really weaving all the pieces together. And did I see, was Ramfis, were you? Or no, okay. I mean, if you want, you can, but no pressure.
Are there any other questions or comments? And Faith, just so I am understanding correctly, that's a piece of information that you want us to sort of track moving forward. Not, yeah, okay, great. Is there
Michael?
anything else? Can I ask?
Oh, Michael's.
Oh, Michael, your hand is up. I see it now. Go ahead.
My hand is up. I am going to, I'd like to back up, reiterate what Faith said about using community members. We're looking at just, I mean, what is that, 80 mini grants a year, a total of 80 of them to reach the 400,000, if my math is even remotely correct. It might be a good time, because I think that I'm hoping that we get to use community members to do evaluations of the RFPs, the big grants. And so this might be a good sort of, I don't know, I don't want to say testing base, but a good way to start that with community members and doing evaluations of grants. Since, when we went into evaluating grants, we had put this all together. We'd have hundreds of hours of discussion about how it was going to work. Everything else, community members might not have all that, but it might be a good place to start. If that would take any load off, it might just be an additional load that's just makes it an even heavier lift though too, right?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think that's, oh. And I saw Shanice's
hand go up and down, but I wanted to maybe, before we go to Shanice, Angela, if you could just like describe what the actual evaluation would be and what it wouldn't be for the mini grants, I think that would be useful.
Yeah, great. So, so for the mini grants, we're trying to allow it to be responsive and to kind of move quickly. There's very little evaluation happening because it's not like a scoring based application. It's more a sort of eligibility and then a prioritization. But the piece that is going to be evaluated is the piece around the question that asks, how does your funding request support or further the PCEF goals to address climate change and support racial and social justice? And so that's the piece where there's going to be multiple sets of eyes to really think about what's being asked for, how they're explaining the connection between the funding request and the goals. So there's something there, and I think this is good for us to think about because we're talking about having multiple people. I think the current thinking on it is that it would be 2 different staff people, but I think that there's an opportunity there because it's such a small bite size, especially with the cohorts, to think about how we can fit in other sets of eyes to sort of jump in. And because it's so small, that could be a good sort of stepping stone towards, bigger participation. But otherwise, the rest of the process isn't being evaluated. It's just sort of like, there's the ask, there's are they eligible, there's where do they fall in the prioritization. Yeah.
Shanice, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I'll just quickly affirm. I put my hand down because I want to stay relevant to what we're actually talking about. But I just resonate with what was shared and think there could be an opportunity to explore maybe I think with multiple components of where we have review or input on some of these applications that will come in for different kinds of grants, paying members of the community. And I know there's kind of a set way that looks from the city side, but yeah, I think that would be great to explore here. And I think in terms of having questions or clarifications, I think the memo itself was definitely comprehensive, and to Fee's point, I think does bring up does bring up a lot of what we were wrestling with in the last meeting. And I think I'm curious about how we make it possible and set up the right stakeholders in the process overall. And I guess they're just questions, but
Thanks, Shanice. And I'll add to that, and this kind of touches on a few folks, is that, June just presented. June and I are working really closely on how mini grants is really going to be a puzzle piece with a lot of those other efforts. And so, Faith, earlier I wrote down, because you had this idea of like, oh, it would be great if this kind of thing happened. I was like, that's a great mini grant application right there, $5,000 to get, collaborative effort with community folks to come together to think about XYZ. So those conversations and making all the connections between all those different efforts is happening. And so as well with the cohorts. Ramfis?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for the memo, and I think just echoing what folks have said thus far. And some of the questions I just brought is just random. What does randomization mean? And I think these are probably questions that you all have answered in the first round. So, but I hope it's helpful for the general public and folks who are respective applicants wanting to apply. My only 2 cents here is hopefully this is an area where you just continue to tinker around what does fairness and responsiveness mean, because I think the challenge of being responsive here seems like we're still building a list and then using randomization. But I just want to encourage continued tinkering around where we can be challenging us as an institution to what does responsiveness mean as a grant. And then I think second point, and I don't think this is really more not asking for changes here for the mini grant, but I think just encourage staff to feel empowered to sort of find us solutions of how to build capacity for organizations, even if it's outside of the mini grant framework. Because I think my point still stands that I made in the last meeting that 5,000 isn't really enough to build capacity. So I know we've kind of set an initial framework last year, but I would hope that staff feels empowered to think of constructive solutions to fund or build capacity for new and emerging organizations that we as a committee can respond to and tinker and have public input in. So just wanted to leave that note, but just appreciative of just the due diligence and responsiveness here, Angela, on the memo.
Great, thank you. And yes, definitely centering that, and we've sort of continued that conversation in a lot of different ways. And we'll have more to report on that front.
Any other thoughts or questions? We are, do folks feel like comfortable with the mini grant program as it sort of has been described with the modifications that Angela talked about, which are essentially these two that from the original proposal, that we have sort of added a prioritization for organizations that both reflect and serve PCEF priority populations, and moved up the schedule for kind of your evaluation, the committee's evaluation of how the program is going. I'm seeing a couple thumbs up, but what we're really looking for is a proposal to authorize the launch of the program so that we can get dollars in the hands of organizations to assist them in time to be able to help with the next RFP and, you know, any of the other things that they might want to use it for.
I'll make the proposal to accept, I don't know what you want to call it, whatever the mini grant proposal that's been presented. I'll make a proposal that we adopt it.
Thanks, Robin. And I'm gonna go around. It looks like James just put the instructions for our decision-making process into the chat as a reminder for the audience and for us about the decision. So each committee member can affirm the proposal, stand aside, or indicate that no, they do not support the proposal. So I'm just going to go through and ask each of you to do that. So Faith?
Yes, I support the proposal.
Jeffrey?
I support.
Amanda?
I support.
Shanice?
I support.
Ranfis?
I support.
Michael?
I support.
Megan?
I support.
And Maria?
I support.
All right, and Robin put the proposal forward, so we know that he supports, and so we are ready to launch, and we'll report back on how much time it takes to actually get it done. Thank you, Angela, so much.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And so keep an eye out. There's going to be a big blast for it, and we'll want to get that out through all the networks when it gets launched. Early June.
Okay.
Okay, so the next part of the meeting now, because the break was a little bit in a slightly different place than it was in our original PowerPoint, but we're going to move right into a conversation about minimum scores and threshold review. And I would just encourage committee members to be as kind to Sam as they have been to June and to Angela as we move into this conversation. Sam, go ahead.
Thank you, Katie. And just for you all, as well as members of the public, we did we do have a breakout session included in this because we realized that this is going to be a place where you're going to want to break apart in small groups and discuss this. So just know that that's going to come. And so I'm generally going to ask that, and it's a brief presentation. There isn't too many slides, just 2 slides before we get to the breakout. But generally, reach out if you have clarifying questions, but want to hold your discussions themselves to the breakouts here. That'll happen in about 10 minutes or so. So, and folks in the public that are joining via Zoom will also be able to observe those particular breakout discussions. So thank you all. I'm glad you got to hear from both June and Angela on both just the great work that's happening and leading and building the broader scaffolding around and the support systems around the main RFP. And so this is picking up one of the core conversations that we identified early on that we knew we were going to need to come back to as part of year 2. When we think about some of those, we've identified some of those core elements of the RFP we're going to need to really dig into, and we'll highlight some of those others that will remain that we'll discuss in June and July towards the end of this towards the end of the meeting today. But this was a key one. In year 1, we did not define a minimum threshold. Now, part of that was that we were going out with $8.6 million in funding. And so I think there's always a good sense that we were going to have a lot of demand. And so that really drove the amount of demand and the limited availability of funds led us to projects that were great. However, when we go out with $60 million in this next RFP, it's going to be really important that we talk about minimum scores. And it's something we had talked about last year, but now we're bringing that conversation. So in this conversation, we'll first talk about minimum scores and just how the various ways in which we could set up minimum scores and the implications of it. And we'll just really talk that through. And then we'll move on and talk, and after we come out of our breakout groups and report out, we'll come back and talk a little bit about a threshold review and the implications for that, for your all's work and engagement in actually being part of evaluating proposals and reviewing proposals, as well as potentially our community cohort, to the extent that folks are on board for that idea. So we'll focus this first bit just on the minimum score. All right, Katie, next slide. So just to bring folks and catch folks back up to speed, this is the way we broke apart the application and generally the way we scored the sections. There was content on the organizational information. This was looking at the organizational background, the board, the staff, its financial capacity, or its financial, its books broadly. There's questions about the project, the specific project description and scope, and things that we evaluated around that, around the thoroughness and the project, the why around the project, all of that. There's questions that we evaluated around the environmental benefits, the greenhouse gas benefits, both direct, indirect, and non-greenhouse gas environmental benefits, such as species habitat, water quality, air quality. Social benefits, this is where we captured and really scored health benefits, benefits in terms of who was receiving the benefits, the dollar savings, the utility savings, the bill savings, those sorts of benefits, and other climate resiliency and other benefits. And then we had a workforce and contractor benefits that we evaluated as well, that we had questions about, that we scored. And this revolved around the diversity, the safety, the wages that folks, that workforce was receiving in a particular project, as well as the diversity of the contractors leading the projects. And then there's the last section on budget. And this is just questions on the budget and whether there was, to what extent there was some leverage there. So generally, these were the key sections. I just want to orient you all to that before we get to the next slide. But before that, I just want to, as the way the criteria were defined, if you recall, there was sort of a 0 points to a 4 points scale for every single question within each of these sections. And for each of those questions, generally, half of all points were possible for organizations that reflected the status quo. That was sort of what that middle, that 2 was defined as, was sort of that status quo. So just so as you all are thinking in the next step, that really about 50% of the points reflected in across the entire application reflected a status quo sort of project across the board. And that meant it struck the middle of the climate benefits and other things, depending if it had those. And then this is something just to catch folks back up so you can remind folks, for applications that did not have physical improvements. So these were either workforce training projects, contractor training projects. These could have been conservation education projects, but projects that did not have actual physical improvements or were investing in infrastructure. It is important to note that because there's a certain skip pattern, because for those projects we did not apply they weren't held to all the questions, they could get all the points in section 1 organizational information and a handful of points in the rest of the other section and still reach 50% of overall points. So it's just something to hold in mind, and we'll come and revisit this. Okay, next slide. So what we will be proposing, well, let me just read through this and orient folks before we get to sort of some of what we're thinking here. One of the initial changes that we're going to be thinking through is that initial scoring is going to be performed by 2 staff members per application, and that the initial scoring would serve to eliminate applications that do not meet the minimum score. Now, the purpose of this is that it's a means to an end and open and create more space for thoughtful review. Last year, we received 140 applications, and we were fortunate enough that we worked the numbers exactly. It worked just well that for every single scoring panel, we had at least 1 committee member on there and 1 committee member review all the applications. We absolutely expect this next year that we're going to receive substantially more applications. Maybe not necessarily 8 times more applications, but substantially more. And so it's really framing this so that we can get a sense for how do we set you all up so that you can really be in a position so that you can all be doing the most thoughtful review of the projects, as opposed to doing a cursory review of how, of whether that looks like 30 applications per committee member or whatever else. And we want to just manage on and really think about how we get you to a place where you can do a thoughtful review. And so it's a few different ways in which you can think about minimum scores. But before I go into that, I just wanted to kind of jump back to the rationale around 2 staff members per, scoring each application. I just realized it's really important to have 2 people because even there we see different things, we pick up on different things. So that would be a starting place of that, as opposed to 1 staff member, which staff member did some of the scoring for some of the more objective or objective criteria. We would even have 2 for those. And so we would carry 2 through the entire applications. And then we would also, I'm going to just jump to the bottom, we would also hold a place and recommend that there's an audit subcommittee of committee members that would be looking at, after the fact, looking and evaluating the scoring of applicants that do not meet the minimum scores, in order to look back and say, okay, did we get this right? Did we miss anything? And so that we can tweak that after the fact. And so as we get to the actual minimum scores, there's a few different ways you all can consider them. You can look at a minimum score where it's a percentage of the overall score. So out of the 100 total possible points, does an entity need to receive 60, 70 points in order to, or 60 points in order to move forward to the scoring panel to be seen by committee members? You could do it based on a percent of the score for a given section. So do you want to see an applicant receive at least X percent in the organizational background section, X percent in the project scope, X percent in the environmental benefits? So you can come up with a percentage that you'd want to see for every single one of the scoring sections. And then lastly, you could just focus on a couple sections. If that could be one way. But ultimately, the objective here is that we start the conversation today around ways in which we can think about minimum scores, because in large part we do expect there to be a substantially greater number of applications, and we want to focus and think about how we can get you all to a place where your review we get you a place where you can do a thoughtful review, as opposed to putting necessarily 30 or some odd applications in front of you. So the 3 questions before we send you all in breakout groups, what we're gonna do is I won't even read the questions maybe yet. I'll ask, is there any just clarifying questions around what we mean by minimum score? How would we do that? What are the implications of it around when we say minimum score? What are we saying next? I know that's a good bit there, and it can often get confused with threshold review.
Robin?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the questions about the minimum score criteria, the question that's on the table is not whether we do have minimum scores or not, right? I mean, I'm kind of getting the gist that we're going forward with that, and that the question on the table is more so, what are some of the ways that we can implement minimum scoring? Is that correct?
Robin, I'll share, to just answer that very clearly. I think that it's certainly, you all can decide that you don't want to have a minimum score. That's on the table. It would have implications. We want to. I think there's an assumption here that we're making on staff side that there isn't going to be that kind of capacity to review to do the same level of committee member review on every application that we had last go around, given just what we're expecting to see. So I don't want to say that's not, by no means is that we've gone past that. I think that's the assumption we're making. And so so that's the conversation we're hoping to have here, is how do we do it? But if they're fundamental, let's talk about that to the extent that that's folks see other ways of going about it.
Michael, and then Shanice.
So I have a few questions, and these are just more number questions and kind of fundamentally initial scoring results, right? So last year we had 142 applicants. We approved 42. That gave us 15 each member to review in the end, which pretty much felt like kind of the maximum number, right? We might be able to go a little higher this next funding round because we might have a little more time, but and we approved 42 of those. Out of the, if you were to look into the future, I know Angela thinks that's my job, but how many would you be sending through after initial scoring in order for us to hit review again? Because if we're Because it sounds like your idea is that we would once again get something like 150 coming through, and then at that point we have 60 million to give out. Are we just approving all 142, and has the initial scoring just like washed out everything, and we grant everything that initial scoring hasn't passed?
Michael, it's a great question, and because we do have a slide talking about how we do that threshold review and just suggestions and thoughts on that, I would really love it if we can hold off on responding to that, in part because we want to really tease out the minimum. Just we know that minimum scores, it's a big thing, and then we know we'll come back to this and start really fleshing out ways and more details to how you can think about it. But I do have slides at the end to think about the actual, beyond sort of the function and the use of a minimum score, what we do after that. Like once we, exactly what number do we set it to, and then what do we do in terms of the review, in terms of how you all are plugged into it, as well as, it's still a proposal and we still think it's a potential, and we think we're hearing a lot of interest, but the community cohort, which we have 6 members as part of, and just how that plays into the numbers that we're thinking about. So I want to get there, and I want to just say we'll get there in the last slide, if that's okay.
Shanice and then Ramses.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to sit with, and that there could be some space in our process to think about that. And a question that I feel like is just more connected to potential scenarios that we might get to in the future of what that could look like is what kinds of applicants, if you will, would fall into that category, and what they look like. And I would hate to set up conditions where it feels restrictive to the people who might need access to these funds. And yeah, what does that look like? I think is just a pondering that I'm having around the characteristics of these folks who might be in that category. Yeah.
I'll just really quickly say thank you, Shanice. That's exactly the questions that we hope I'll lay out the questions for the breakout group, but that's exactly the questions that we hope you all will lay out and elevate in the breakout group, so we can come back to you all in a follow-up meeting. So Michael, I see your hand, Ramses, to the extent that it's questions about the sort of how, I would encourage you all to hold those until the breakout groups, because we've got a few questions to get you all thinking about that. But clarifying questions on what do we mean, or what is the function of minimum scores, I want to make sure we can answer that, so that you feel informed before you go into the breakout group.
Ramses, did you still have a question or a clip?
I guess trying to stay relevant to the question you've asked here. I think, without getting too ahead here, I'm generally supportive of this. I think maybe something to just reframe here, maybe for folks, and maybe the intent of the minimum score, because I think maybe folks are we're caught up on the eliminating versus, I think, the aspect that we're prioritizing to give more time to the group, to the applications that are meeting the mission of PCEF and serving priority populations. So I definitely always share that, and I think it's just always a good clarifying question. Like, again, how does the minimum score just fit in with the values, and how we're prioritizing our limited time. So I think maybe it's more just an open-ended question, Sam. But I think that's definitely a question that I'm seeing and trying to use those lens in the role of minimum scores. But sorry, I'm no longer asking a question here. But I think that's just the general question, is like, always what's the North Star here for us? What are the leading values for us to explore? And how is this helping us free up time just to focus on those, key populations? So I think that should just be an ongoing question, and I can probably just take it to the small group here.
Yeah. So as we move into the small groups, I do just want to note that folks who are members of the public who are still hanging on, you will be able to go into small groups, but we are asking that for this 10 minutes, we let committee members kind of grapple with the questions that we're posing to them. Each group will also have a note taker, a staff note taker, and we are asking that each group of committee members kind of like pick someone from amongst yourselves to bring back to sort of report out to the full committee afterwards. Sam?
So I'm going to read the 3 questions. And Ramfus, I just want to say thank you for those comments. I think that's fair. So you said what I wish I could have led with as I described it. And so the questions that we'll want you to think about is just, how do you feel about the function of a minimum score? What is the purpose of having a minimum score? And what questions, really, this is to Shanice, the point that you made, what questions do you have, and what additional information do you need to make a decision about minimum scores? So we can come back to you all.
And I'm going to put those into the chat right. Okay, good. Somebody went into the chat. Thanks you, James.
James, thank you. Okay, let's go ahead if that works. Let's send people into the breakout rooms.
to my right. Okay, welcome back to the main room. This is not everyone though, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, maybe it is everyone. Okay, so hopefully everyone is ready to give just a 1 or 2 minute summary of some of the conversation that happened in your breakout, and I'm going to go ahead and start with the breakout room that I was in because I know who is going to be summarizing that for them. So I'm going to ask Jeffrey to give a little bit of flavor of the conversation.
Okay. In our breakout room, we went over the 3 questions. The first 2 questions, we kind of all were in agreement that, you know, obviously we don't want to eliminate anybody, but there's a need for it. We call it a necessary evil kind of for it, you know, because there's only so many that it's only so much capacity that we have. So obviously though, there's going to have to be some level of filtering at that level. For the third question, which is more geared towards what would make us feel comfortable, what questions do we have in general? Some of the questions that came up were, we have different funding categories. We have, you know, planning grants, small grants, large grants, and if we did like a minimum, right? There's, depending on which section you're in, you know, you wouldn't have as much leeway as far as the way they're being funded, right? So like a planning grant, the organizational structure, there's not as many questions. So if you don't score well on one of them, it has more of an impact on that score and potentially hitting that threshold at that point. So that was one of the questions, you know, that need to get clarified. Another thing that kind of came up was if we were going to set minimums, what would be the kind of the things we would like to set them on? And it was like the priority populations would be the main thing, you know, making sure that, you know, racial equity and you know, social justice, and then also the environmental aspect of it being the main catalyst for setting those minimums, being like the guiding principles for us setting those minimums if we were going to do that. So kind of drawing a blank on the rest of it, but I think that's a general summary of what we discussed.
Yep, I think that covered it. I would just add that we did get a request to sort of bring back some information about our sort of looking to what we saw in our first round and kind of how people scored and how across different categories and grant types. So get a volunteer from one of the other groups.
I can share. I was with Robin and Ramfis, and we overall expressed how we value the minimum scoring exercise and the initial scoring by staff. We felt that time was really important, and that's an important consideration as we're reviewing lots of applications. And if staff can help support that exercise by doing the minimum scoring, that would be helpful. We wanted to make sure that we were spending our most of our time reviewing the most relevant apps that were dedicated to serving the priority populations, and that we wanted priority populations to be evident in the application and not just lukewarm. And I think the last question we wanted to touch on as well is, didn't necessarily need initial information right now, but we just wanted ongoing clarification to learn more about the audit subcommittee, their function and the range of power, to learn more about just mechanisms for transparency and accountability here. And, you know, what happens if we identify disparities, what course of action is taken, and also, you know, what ongoing exercises do staff take to ensure that they're scoring to the best of their abilities. And I think that's most of it. But Ramfis and Robin, chime in if there's anything else you want to emphasize, please.
Thanks, Maria. So who from our last group?
Okay, Michael's not it, I see. Amanda, do you want to share? Or no, you don't either. Okay, great. So our conversation, we had an awesome conversation, and I have to tell you that at least from my perspective, we weren't quite as disciplined as everyone else because we didn't quite get to all of the questions. But one of the things that I think that was really the most pronounced about our conversation was just really looking for unintended consequences and wanting to be sure that we had thought of all those things, and not wanting to miss really great applications from priority populations. So needing to look hard at making sure that it's not grant writing that gets somebody through, excellent grant writing that gets somebody through that kind of minimum score, and instead that it's really stories and a project that fits with solidly within why PCEF exists and what it's meant to fund. I don't know, Michael or Amanda, you want to share anything more?
I guess I think that we, like others had said, that in the scoring sections that organizational information might be a really good place to have minimum scoring because we understand the need for it. Project description and scope might be one that we want to leave out. Environmental and social benefits, I think, are important. And then we do have, we went off on some other tangents on this for a later discussion probably. Maybe Amanda and I can shoot you off some thoughts on that too.
Thank you all. That was useful. Sam, I think I know we're getting up on time. It's 8:20, but Sam, I think that while some of this is fresh in your mind, we want to just spend 5 minutes going over the slide that is about the threshold review and sort of some process considerations, if that's okay. If folks don't mind, we might end about 5 minutes late. So I'm gonna, Ranfis, I saw your hand go up. Did you have? No. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and share that screen so that Sam, you can take it away.
Okay, thank you. So, and I think a big part of just wanting to share this is so that it can start, it's part of the conversation, the thinking around how we use the minimum scores and how minimum scores are, they're used both to get a smaller pool. It's one way to get a smaller pool to all, and to focus your review, but it's also a way to ensure that the 60 million that we do move out is going to the projects we ultimately, the types of projects we want to fund that squarely align with the intent of the program. And so threshold review is it's related and connected to that. And this is some of the points, Michael, you're speaking to. I'm just going to run through this. Right now, committee, one of the key things is that committee member participation on each scoring panel is a limiting factor. And so it creates the need for a threshold review to reduce the number of application-intensive scoring panels. So 2 questions we want you all to be thinking about as we come back to this conversation, and we'll think about it, whether it's a survey or other ways, but just, this is a question we asked several meetings back, but will each panel include a committee member? If yes, how many hours do you want to dedicate to the task? And then we'll have to check in and see, does that work when we've got, depending on the number of applications. So there's some of this that is just, it's going to evolve based on the numbers that we get. And this year is just as much another year of, not a year of uncertainty, another year of learning, to see exactly how we right size both our processes, And then if it isn't sufficient in terms of higher number of applications, is it okay for some members to sit on scoring panels and some members not? So one example path that we just laid out here for you all to be able to think about, and think about in the context of how you all use your valuable time and how to focus on applications, is one way we've pulled together is, you know, the committee and the community cohorts, those 6 members would be scoring the applications on the margins. So what we would do is that essentially staff would score, one example is that staff would score do the initial scoring and rank the projects within all the funding areas. And so then applications with scores below a minimum needed for consideration, and applications that are going to clearly rise to the top would be withheld from scoring panels. So just to reframe that, the projects that are just a given, they're scoring really well, they're a given, they rise, we're straight to the top, we would withhold those from the scoring panels. And then the projects that don't meet the minimum score, we would withhold those from scoring panels because they wouldn't move forward. So then potentially, and this is where we get to 6 scoring panels, would be 6 scoring panels comprised of 1 community member, 1 committee member, 1 community cohort member, and 1 staff member would score 90 applications that are on the margin, and the final scores would be used to develop the portfolio for committee recommendations. And the way we get to 90 is each of those panels reviewing 15 applications. So there'd be six scoring panels. And so that's a scenario where you might not have every committee member participating, but you would have the six community cohort members. So we want you all just to think about that example. It's going to be something we're going to come back to as we think about these questions, the questions that have been raised for you all in these discussions, as we think about additional ways in which and additional details for folks to think about. So I'm looking at the time here. Let's skip to the next slide, and then let's see if I'm hesitant till then. Let's skip to the next slide.
Yeah, I just maybe just real quick before we do that, Sam, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was sort of tracking that in the beginning, in June's community engagement update, sort of one of the examples that y'all spent a little bit of time talking about was that outreach cohort. One of those folks, that's the cohort that we're talking about being on the scoring panel. So that's they sort of will have been brought in and have like a depth of kind of knowledge and experiences with PCEF before kind of being put into a position where they're asked to evaluate applications. So I just wanted to make sure that connection was happening there.
And I know that the comment came that why only 6, and we can get into that rationale. We can come back and explain that. It generally revolved around being the first year and capacity to do it well, but it also revolved around contracting limitations in terms of the way that we're doing this within the city to move quicker, and contracting limitations around how we go out for bid and what we can do on a 3-month timeline in terms of moving a contract. And there's a certain limitation in terms of just the structures in which we're pulling this together. And so we can get into that if there's interest, but there's a couple of reasons why we've narrowed to 6. So that's the limitation. So just as folks are thinking about the next meetings up ahead, one thing we've highlighted, and we know that we're going to need you all to dig in and really tease out, is just workforce development, and just thinking about allocations and considerations on how much goes towards direct job training and job placement for folks that are workforce eligible versus really whether it's K through 12, whether it's 6 through 12, the education skill building at the younger levels. Innovation and funding. Consider we're going to really need to better define this for applicants. And do we define a set aside here for transportation? Is there any appetite for funding of and use of products that are not commercially viable? And this is one area where, as I think Brand Fish, you're asking, and this is one area we can talk about how to get more creative around capacity building as well, particularly in this category. So just thinking around that, so that's a conversation we'll have to talk about. Land building and acquisition, we're going to need to just clarify parameters. Anti-displacement, we've got a conversation scheduled for the meeting or tentatively scheduled for the meeting on the 16th to further talk about that and bring in our anti-displacement team from the Bureau. And then we'll be returning back to the conversation on grant caps as well as thresholds. And so we'll be working with Michael and Maria to kind of tease out how we do that, as well as bringing back additional findings from the evaluation that require your input. So that's all in process right now. We're just distilling a lot of that feedback, and so we'll continue to bring back all of the evaluation conversations that have been happening with grant applicants or applicants from this last go around, and the conversations we've had, the interviews and conversations we've had with you all, as well as other scoring panel members.
Can I just add one thing to this slide, which is that apparently the edit did not take that. It's supposed to say topics for June and July meetings. So this is not just all going to happen in 2 meetings. So just want to, it's still a lot for June and July, but it is at least not just June.
With that, let's go to committee member comments. I know it's 8:29, but I want to make sure we give you all some space just to share any reflections or anything that are coming up for you all. That works, Katie.
Any closing thoughts or before we close the meeting? Ranjit?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I want to thank staff for just like the throwing us on all the updates today and helping us prepare for some of the decisions that we made today and some of the decisions you're prepping us all to make here in the future. Just gonna put out my desires out in the open. Like I really do hope to continue that we're moving forward. You know, ideally, like I personally would love to read every application and give every community group the time that they need to get closer to human interaction. But I know that those ideals are just not congruent with the time limitations that we realistically have. So for me, like I just wanted to put this out there for folks. Like I would love to continue moving forward where we're able to make time, prioritize where we can, investing that time with relevant, you know, frontline community groups that we're trying to fund and try to get closer to human interactions. I know like we're not proposing that here yet in the conversation of minimum thresholds, but I think that is a theme for me moving forward, because I think the problems of, especially for like folks who are writing the applications where English is their second language, or just English, or like writing isn't their strongest suit, like that bias is going to exist with or without minimum thresholds. And I would hope at some point where we are able to free up some time or find that time to find a new mode for how we evaluate groups where that's not their strength for whatever reason, or to get deeper to hear community from their knowledge directly. And which again, I don't think was fully proposed today, but at least I see that lens and the attempt here for how we free up time. So, you know, I just want to put my thoughts, desires, you know, out there. And I think it'll be just a reoccurring theme for me, because I think, you know, I feel like we have a shared goal here. And I just want us to continue problem solving about how we get there and how we put the heart in grant making that sometimes feels a bit transactional. So I'll pause there and just thank the staff and the committee for some of the conversations we've had today thus far.
Thanks, Francis. Any other thoughts before we close? Michael?
I'd just like to continue on with what Ramfis was saying, which is to also, and we're sort of touching on it today, like Ramfis said, but that, you know, we have communities that have funded historically through word of mouth, through talking with neighbors, through talking with friends, through talking with their church groups, through oral tradition, through the spoken word, that don't translate onto paper. So I'm really hoping that as we continue with this, that we don't forget that not all communities fundraise in the same ways, and they don't all share resources in the same ways. And we are a community funding group, and that our communities fundraise in very different ways than just the written word. And also thanks for everybody's hard work.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all. I'm not going to attempt the clapping activity, and I don't know that unless we have any volunteers for that, I'm happy to participate, but not practiced enough to do it yet. So Ranfis's hand is still accidentally up, but oh nope, now it's down. Okay.
I'd say I'll make a motion that I look forward for us doing that together in person in the near or sometime future. So I make a motion for us to close the meeting, but look forward for us doing this in person.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Ranfis. Thank you all. Have a good night, and we will see you soon.
Night, everybody.